in planning and implementation of a 5-year USAID, do I need to spell that one? Say that one, United States. What is this? What's USAID for? It's like you use the acronyms and you don't actually know what they mean, right? But that's also development funding, a project that they have on the National Community-Based Treatment and Recovery Program in Philippines. And she's going to talk about taking a curriculum that was developed by an international work group with U.S. State Department funds and translating that in a variety of different ways to be useful for the work that they're doing in the Philippines, training their workforce. And then our final speaker today in this panel is Dr. Beatrice Kathanga, who is a counseling psychologist and faculty member in the Department of Psychology at the Kenyatta University in Kenya. She is the immediate former chair of the Department of Psychology and is responsible for steering the development of the Drug Demand Reduction Education Program in the Department of Psychology at Kenyatta University. And she'll be sharing about that process of creating that program. That's her presentation. Besides teaching at the university, she's also involved in research on drug use among youth and marginalized groups in Kenya, as well as rehabilitation of children in the juvenile justice system. She works closely with the Kenya government's National Authority Against Drug Abuse, and she's also a founding member of the Kenyan chapter of the International Society for Substance Use Prevention and Treatment Professionals, which is called ISUP. Some of you may have heard of that, as well as being closely involved with the establishment of ICUDDR, the International Consortium of Universities for Drug Demand Reduction. That one I will remember. At the global level, she is trained as a global master trainer for a universal treatment curriculum, as well as the curriculum on treatment for substance use disorders in children through the Colombo Plan. She's also contributed to the expansion of the UTC, the Universal Treatment Curriculum, and child curriculum across countries in Africa, Asia, and South America. So you can see a very esteemed group of speakers that we have here today talking about translational research. So Irina, come on up. You should just be able to click.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It is a pleasure for me to take part in this international forum and tell about my country, Ukraine. The topic of my presentation, assessment of training needs among specialists who provide help to people with substance use disorders. And let me start with some background information. Ukraine is situated in the east part of North Hemisphere, and Kiev is as far as 9,800 kilometers away from San Antonio. It takes a 17 hours flight to get there. Ukraine, one on the largest countries in Europe. Its area is 600,500 square kilometers. Ukraine bordered with Russia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Moldova, Romania, Hungary. Geographical center of Europe located in Ukraine. Majority of citizens lives in cities. Ukraine is a very beautiful country with 2 seas. There are mountains, lakes, plains, steppes, and modern citizens. The capital of Ukraine is Kiev, with population nearly 3 million people. The overall population of Ukraine on January the 1st, 2018 accounted more than 42 million. Among them, 6.5 are children under the age 14, and more than 1 million are adolescents. Morbidity of mental illness was 250 per 1,000 people, and the prevalence about 1,500,000 people. On red color is the addiction psychiatric data. In Ukraine, there are many ministries and departments having their own mental health services. Notably, Ministry of Health of Ukraine, Ministry of Social Policy, Ministry of Education, Interior, Defense, Justice, Infrastructure Ministry. According to the data Ministry of Health of Ukraine, there are 892 addiction psychiatry, 2,495 psychiatrists, and 8 beds for addiction treatment and 67 psychiatric beds per 100,000 population. The main features of national system of mental health are separation of psychiatric and addiction treatment services, catastrophically insufficient funding for outpatient care with main focus being on inpatient care. For the protection of the mental health of the population, less than 3% of the health budget is located. Stigmatization, discrimination, and social exclusion of the people with mental disorders still exist. Among 17 higher educational institutions in Ukraine, under the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, there are 27 facilities that specialize in the field of psychiatry, addiction psychiatry, child forensic psychiatry, and medical psychology. In addition, 3 faculties are located in the university subordinate to the Ministry of Education, and we have 1 private medical university. Currently, medical education path in Ukraine looks like this. The first step, full higher education for obtaining a medical degree, 6 years. 4th year, medical students have 135 hours course on psychiatry and addiction psychiatry. Second step, internship of psychiatry, 1.5 years, 1,600 hours and 60% theoretical course. And third step, specialization training, addiction psychiatry, 4 months, 624 hours. After this step is allowed to have a clinical practice, and other is postgraduate training. Aside of this, doctor may take 4 years to do a research for this PhD and consequently 2 more years for doctorate. Starting from 2008 in Ukraine, the specialist training program for doctors and the system of postgraduate education was modified, in particular in continuous postgraduate education with receiving 250 credits was introduced. The proposed modification will give the opportunity to develop a new qualification improvement courses and adapt the ones already developed. There are no official courses or specialization for nurses who will work in addiction treatment facility, as well as for psychologists and social workers. Partly because of this, there are many training programs in non-state sector, and those training programs vary across quality and length of training and do not have state certification. Also, there are addiction council, people who provide a lot of psychosocial support and rehabilitation center. Officially, there is no such professional as addiction counsellor in Ukraine. Therefore, there are no training courses or official employment for them. In reality, they undergo special short-term courses from their rehabilitation center and can be employed in a creative way. Assessment of training needs among specialists who provide help to people with substance use disorder was conducted by Ukrainian Psychiatric Association on the order of the SAMSA, Substance Use Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, in 2017-28. The relevance of assessment arose due to the need to improve the competence of specialists in connection with the increasing prevalence of use of psychoactive substances in Ukraine, HIV epidemic, an insufficient number of addiction psychiatry, and the lack of accreditation of non-medical specialists who provide assistance. The goal of the project was to study the current needs of professional training for further provision of support to specialists in various spheres who provided consulting, treatment, and rehabilitation services in the field of addiction, and to create multidisciplinary additional project. The questionnaire training needs survey for specialists who provide help to people with substance use disorder, provided by Substance Use Disorder Advisor SAMHSA, was used in the study. The questionnaire was translated and adopted by the Ukrainian team of researchers and included the following section: general information, work experience, frequency and ease of use of knowledge and skills, need for knowledge and skills, desired training mode. The study covered the whole territory of Ukraine. Data collection was carried out in 25 regions of Ukraine. The survey was conducted among 1,008 doctors, psychologists, social workers, nurses, and addiction counselors at organizations of different ownership and subordinated from in all regions of Ukraine. According to the sphere of activities, there are following group of respondents. 32% are engaged in medical activities: psychiatrists, addiction psychiatry, intensive care physician, infection disease doctor. 21% are engaged in nursing care. 16% director of rehabilitation centers, chief physician, head of the department. And two groups, 13%, psychologists, the first group, psychologists and social worker, and other group provides social, psychological, and educational work with convicts at penitentiary institution. And last small group, 5%, are engaged in education, counseling, and volunteer work. The majority of respondents, 62.6%, work at state health institution, 15% at non-state rehabilitation centers, 22.7% at penitentiary institution. The vast majority, 94%, reported that they work full-time, 53% were women, the average age 45 years. More than half of the specialists, 54%, received additional training on addiction in the last 5 years. The training program initial course of medication-assisted therapy passed 25% specialists. In HIV-related topics were trained 39% specialists, of each 86% passed in the training course, voluntary consulting and testing program, and 20% course antiretroviral therapy. The average time working in the field of education, treatment, and rehabilitation, specialists who supervise the treatment and rehabilitation work, and the doctor, 90 years, nurses, 32 years, psychologists and social worker, age 6 years, counselors, 6 years, and specialists who supervise social, psychological, and educational work with convicts, 25 years. Nearly 15% of respondents work on the med side, and 35% work with med clients. During the analysis of the distribution of training needs among a group of specialists, the following 13 differences were found. The greatest need for training was expressed by addiction counselors. The somewhat lower need to training was expressed by the psychological specialists who work with convicts. The interest in the training among nurses, doctors, psychologists, and social worker is about on the same level. The doctor, the most interested in the issue of amphetamine, opioid addiction, and general treatment issue. Nurses express higher interest in all topics with higher priority concerning alcohol and amphetamine addiction, general treatment issue, and non-pharmacological intervention. The specialists who provide professional social and psychological assistance express a desire to master the skill of non-pharmacological intervention, as well as to expand their knowledge regarding amphetamine and alcohol addiction. Psychological specialism from penitentiary facilities express higher interest in the issue of alcohol addiction and basic knowledge concerning addiction. Addiction counselors are most interested in the studying non-pharmacological intervention, general treatment issue, and basic knowledge concerning addiction. In general, the needs for training in MED among all specialists is lower than that for general treatment of addiction. Specialists are most interested in the regulatory framework of MED program, treatment of opioid addiction with naltrexone, with buprenorphine, interaction of medication between methadone and some common medication, relation of methadone program with other health program and education treatment. When organizing the training process, the most specialists find the following important. The first of all, consulting at the workplace after training and other scientific validation of offer of evidence, practical orientation, exchange of idea with other program, and other. In Ukraine, the main problem is the inconsistency of the system of mental health education with modern requirements. There is interest of obtaining new knowledge and skill in examination and training dependence. Existing training courses and programs do not always comprehensively cover those questions that experts have shown. The requirement for studying differ in the specialists of different field and activity. Scientific substantiation and practical orientation of training should be in the priority. The system of the higher and postgraduate education in the field of mental health require a systematic and differentiated improvement in the content of education program, methodology of training, and assessment of competency normally. Change state educational program of the possible extent, creating courses for physicians of different specialties, the introduction of the curriculum within the specialization of addiction psychiatry, and creating a master program on addiction for non-medical and medical specialists, adoption of addiction counselor profession, and implementation of standards of treatment and rehabilitation. And our prospection, improvement of the training system for specialists in the field of mental health, bringing the education of mental health specialists in line with modern world standards, strengthen the role of mental health professionals through appropriate changes in the standards of training specialists, and of course, development of international cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
So we thought we'd hold questions to the very end. So if you have questions for Dr. Pinchuk, write them down so you don't forget, and we'll have Dr. Melgar come speak. So just push the green button.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Isabel Melgar from Ateneo de Manila University, and that's located in Manila, Greater Manila. I'd like to thank the sponsors like Nidainternationalforum and of course Dr. Kim for giving me the opportunity to represent our country. This is my first time actually to attend the forum. So the topic that I'm going to talk about is the adaptation of universal treatment curriculum walkthrough, which I will explain later what it is, and we'll let you know what was our experience. Now, I think not all of you are familiar with our country. We are located in Southeast Asia, and we're very near Hong Kong, Taiwan, and of course, Thailand, Vietnam. And on the southern part would be Malaysia and Thailand, Borneo. And as you can see, Philippines is an archipelago. It has 7,200 islands during low tide. Okay. At high tide, we were 7,100. Okay, Philippines, we have been colonized by Americans for several decades, and we speak your language, although in a slower pace, and we import a lot of things from America. So 2 days ago, the streets of the academic community was almost empty, according to my daughter, because the university students, high school students, were watching the NBA championship. So that's what we are, okay? And we as the country was selected to be one of the pilot of the Colombo Plan's training program for service providers. But before that, can I just share with you a little about the drug situation and the government response? Okay. Now, drug situation, we have 4 million as of the latest record of our government. And the government response is first, all those who are drug users must surrender and put their names on the list of drug users. Okay. So 1.2 million persons have surrendered and have put down their names. Why? To protect themselves. Otherwise, you can be I'm sorry to say this, a random victim. Okay. It's being criminalized, like possessing 5 grams of drugs would put you to jail for 12 years. And so far, there are, of course, daily arrests. And now we are 615% congested in prisons. So that's how terrible it is. And about maybe 2.5 years, 3 years ago, when we have this drug issue being very pronounced in newspapers, the knee-jerk reaction of many local government units around our country was, okay, tell all local surrenderies to come to the barangay hall. Barangay is the smallest political unit, and they should be dancing the Zumba at least 1.5 hours a day. So they were all compliant. You see, many of our drug surrenderies are males. So you can just imagine, it was fun. That's very Filipino. They wanted to have fun and they wanted to socialize. So the Zumba as an intervention, by the way, has not been evaluated, remains to be popular and very high on the awareness list among communities, as my medical students have researched on. And then we have no existing community-based intervention, and it was only in 2017 that our university, together with the other universities, came together and we developed like a program, a 3-month program for communities, and still we're improving it. Okay, by the way, 95% of those who have surrendered are required to go through community-based drug treatment and recovery, and that's where the gap is. The communities do not have enough interventions to offer. Okay. Oh, you don't have to worry about this flow, but I'm just highlighting this problem. You see, nobody can get referred to a community-based recovery treatment unless they are seen by doctors accredited by the Department of Health. You see, there are only 500 doctors who can screen our drug users and who can refer them to a community-based. Now, there are 4 million who are waiting to be screened and to be referred. So that's the big problem. But recently, before I came here, they said, okay, maybe we can allocate the duties of very first screening to social workers, to community, local government staff, but those who are screened and then who are found to be high users and extreme users should be further screened by doctors. So that's the situation now. Now, why the school? First of all, it's a huge community in itself. We capture the parents, we get the students at the earliest age that they can get hooked. And so this program that I'm going to describe is really about capacity building of guidance counselors, of university professors and staff on a bit of prevention and a lot about what is the treatment all about. And so we hope to get an engagement. So now, the goal of this study, it's not a study, it's ongoing, it's formative in a way, is to make the curriculum that was made available by Colombo Plan to the local community without losing the science. So that's kind of tough in a way. But then, let me just describe to you the psyche of the Filipino. Okay, as a psychologist, I'm speaking about the Filipinos in general. The Filipinos are very accommodating. They're very generous with their smiles. They will say hello in a heartwarming way. And so if they have that kind of receptivity to anything that is foreign, okay, I think I was expecting the same receptivity to a curriculum that is imported. So the translation in this sense is like, how do we adapt what has been imported, okay, to our local culture and to our local context? So it kind of covers a lot. Like we have the opportunity to revise the course structure, include laws and new policies, write local cases, and put in relevant Philippine statistics, etc. Okay. Now, we were selected, like there were about 4 universities who were accredited as service providers, and this is probably like a privilege for those who have been selected because we go through a free 10-day workshop, okay, on treatment issues and procedures. The curriculum was developed through the DAP, Colombo Plan. DAP stands for Drug Advisory Program. It is really more of a knowledge modules rather than a skills training type. So far, over 80 participants of at least 10 different academic institutions were participants to this. And that's, okay, I'm showing this picture just to let you know that majority of the service providers at the university are women. And majority of our users are men. Okay. So this is the typical workshop that was conducted for 10 days. And the participants loved the interactive part, but they were kind of critical on the lecture part. This was in another university, De La Salle University. Okay. The standard UTC course outline, by the way, the original duration of this workshop was 29 days. Okay. We had it for 10 days. That's why they called it walkthrough. Okay. Now, the UTC course outline was in this order. Okay. Physiology and pharmacology, treatment of SUDs, then co-occurring disorders, then basic counseling, and then followed by screening, etc., case management, crisis intervention, and ethics. All right. The typical activities is highly interactive. There's quiz approach, exercises, role play, and practice plans, learning games. The method. I thought that I could have just distributed or put online evaluation sheets. Okay. But knowing my fellow university colleagues, they will not answer it. They don't have the time. That is one excuse that probably I would understand. So I decided we decided, there were three of us, to adopt a method that will bring people and make them talk, get them to interact, and say what they want to say. And these people were those who attended the UTC workshop. So I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Kim Johnson's visit to us, who asked us the first question: How was the UTC walkthrough for you? And so we mumbled, "Oh, it's too long, 10 days. It's hard to get people and maintain them for 10 days, etc." So we thought of a first evaluation workshop, and we invited 18 participants from various universities. And then that was the first. And then we have to have a second evaluation workshop with 13, again, UTC alumni. And this was an overnight, like it's a 2-day workshop. They were not complaining. We just make them work, and that's okay. They had, by the way, the workshop for free. Okay. And then, of course, we have to have research assistants to do the continuous research. So this was the group, the latest group that participated in the UTC revision workshop. All right, what was the feedback? Too long. Okay. Maybe too long to be away from work. And all of us have a common opinion that it should not exceed 5 days. I don't know if that's something that also happening in your countries. And then we need to improve the flow of courses and modules. And it was strange. We were looking at the flow, at the logical flow of the courses, and many of us could not understand the logic of the standard curriculum that was given to us. So that's something that we were proposing in terms of improvement. And then all these local cases that have to be integrated. So I think we know what could have been the deliberations. It was in fact I think a documentation of how the discussions went through could have been a very important source of information for those who are developing modules and exporting it to other cultures. Okay. So I'm on top of this, the localization of materials. Since I have been attending government meetings on new client policy on screening and referral. And yes, there's going to be one that's going to be put out soon, which can affect our workshop. And then I asked my class to submit to me some local cases. And we went through it and edited it. And we had a learning experience on that, because this is very cultural, the local cases that we have written. And then I also worked with my students on the translation and validation of ASSIST and other psychological tools that may be used by centers. One translation was in Filipino, and the other is a major dialect in one of the key islands of the Philippines. And we are also injecting locally produced documentary on drug situation. Other resources added will include a Journal of Psychological Association of the Philippines special issue on drug use and recovery, and this is going to be in August 2019, where myself and my other colleagues are contributing some articles. And then we are also encouraging our students, small research projects and student theses to focus on either drug prevention or drug treatment issues. Now, major changes. Okay. We got what we wanted. We decided to divide the whole curriculum into 2 clusters. Cluster 1 would be 5 days, and cluster 2 will be also another 5-day workshop, but they don't have to be conducted one after the other. We could have one in this year and the next one next year. The cluster 1 is some kind of a fundamental course, while cluster 2 is more specialized. Okay. Second, we revised the flow of topics in the way we think it is actually practiced in the Philippines. And then number 3, we are going to introduce in the resources page local laws and relevant information about the Philippine drug situation. And 4th, we introduced local cases. Okay. That's specifically on the chapter on ethics. So now, we have on the last column, you will see the revised duration, and I think there's pretty much not change, except that there's some courses that we feel like basic counseling that you have more hours than others. Now, the screening will probably change a bit because of the recent pronouncement that even guidance counselors from the universities can do screening, unlike before. So that's the order now that we want: physiology, then screening, then treatment, then talk about ethics. Cluster 2, basic counseling, case management, crisis intervention, and then the co-occurring diseases. So next steps would have to be, again, I said it is a work in progress. We have to finalize a training manual. At least by December, we should come out with something. and then we have to validate it, redo the training workshop. Then, of course, the pilot testing is part of that. Then get feedback. And then we could integrate some specific courses into our graduate curriculum. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kathunga. Oops. Keep going. There we go.
A very good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to share my journey from Africa on how we have tried to translate evidence into a program in a university in Kenya. My name is Beatrice Kadhongo. I'm in the Department of Psychology. I have come to make a presentation of a journey I have walked since 5 years ago when I was selected by the Colombo Plan with funding support from INL to be trained as a global master trainer to disseminate a curriculum called UTC, or Universal Treatment Curriculum, for substance use disorders, first in my country and in my region and globally. And as I got trained in this curriculum, it dawned on me that back home, what we were doing was not evidence-based, and we couldn't say whether it worked or didn't work, but we were doing something. And so I felt challenged to begin at home and do something, because in my country, we are extremely religious, and we always say about over 90% Christian and other religions, and we always say that charity begins at home. And so I did feel the challenge. I was the head of Department of Psychology in this university, which is the second largest state university in Kenya. And I felt that if we weren't getting it right, then we needed to begin at home. And so this is the journey I'm sharing with you on how we have made an effort to translate evidence that we have acquired over time into some sort of practice in our local communities. As I thought about this presentation, and as I have been thinking about this journey, I have been thinking about why we need to bother about evidence-based practice. And having been here since yesterday, I have listened to a lot of data and findings, and I would think it would be pretty useless if we did not translate that into practice in our settings. And therefore, I have asked myself the question, why evidence-based practice? And I have been thinking that over the years, we have been doing something with clients that have substance use problems, including in my country. In my country, the tendency, and probably in Africa, we tend to think a lot about our ancestors, about invisible forces that have a way of shaping our lives and destinies. And therefore, if we have people using substances in problematic ways, then we will think about the ancestors, we are going to think about religion, we're going to think about exorcism, and we're going to think about many different practices that are not based on any evidence. And therefore, I have just noticed, and I am acknowledging, that over the years we have had practices happening in my country and probably in many parts of the world that are not supported by evidence, that do not necessarily work, and which probably don't address the needs of our clients, and which are not necessarily safe. In fact, lots of them could lead to more problems for our clients, if not death, and which are not necessarily timely and fair for our clients. And because of this, then we have a lot of challenges in my country and my part of the world. We have failed treatments. We have frustration of clients and families where you take in your relatives or your family members for treatment repeatedly, and the relapse rates are extremely high. We have wastage of resources by individuals, families, and communities. And coming from a country where resources are constrained, because Kenya is a developing country, this really has an impact. We have lack of faith in treatment processes, and because of that, insurance companies don't want to cover anything to do with substance use. And therefore, as a country, we have to think about how we can translate what we do with our clients with substance use disorders into science, so that we can be able to say that what we are doing has some scientific validity, is feasible, and is sustainable. And that is why I get interested in reflecting about evidence-based practice. And of course, some of the people that have tried to define evidence-based practice is talking about using practices where the evidence is strongest and most accepted, and therefore is likely to have a significant impact in improving care for our clients. And this is basically what this slide is talking about: issues of science, issues of clinical and financial feasibility, and issues of clinical expertise as advocated by the US Institute of Medicine. The likely impact of evidence-based practice is that we are going to have better outcomes for our clients. We shall have reduction on wastage of resources. We're going to demonstrate that what we do works, and therefore we will have more faith by our governments and by our different corporates in terms of investing in insurance for clients with substance use disorders. As we stand in my country, only one treatment center has some coverage by the insurance company. And that then means that every other person trying to access treatment may never afford to get treatment. And that then goes to issues of equity and issues of fairness when we think about substance use disorders. Now, in Kenya, the situation of substance use disorders is real. We have got our national authority that campaigns against drug abuse called NACADA. They've given some statistics of how big or small the problem is, and we can see that about 18% of 15 to 65 years are using at least one substance or another. Of course, our biggest headache is alcohol use disorders, and we have about 10% of them having a substance use disorder and therefore requiring intervention, and most of them do not get to access. The other thing about our country, like I said earlier, is that we have different approaches to addressing issues of drug abuse. We have got very little data on whether what we are doing is working. We have little data about what we are doing in the different treatment centers. We just have one treatment center run by the government. The rest have mushroomed from different parts of the country, primarily led by people who are in recovery and who want to do something for their fellow people with substance use disorders. We have a lot of shortage of treatment professionals. The few that are offering treatment probably covered a little topic or course as part of their degree program on substance use disorder. And therefore, this gave me the need, or pushed me to think about what is it that we can do as a country to be able to translate all this global knowledge into a program that could empower our people to be able to meet the needs of our clients on the ground. So the situation in Kenya, again, is that in the treatment field for substance abuse, we don't have really professionals who are trained to deal with clients with substance use disorders. So what we have is psychiatrists, physicians, nurses, psychologists like myself, counselors, social workers, who struggle to deal with issues of substance abuse. In fact, for many of them, when a client shows up with a substance use disorder, they are a headache for the practitioner, because the practitioner is a psychiatrist who thinks they should deal with a problem that the client hasn't brought upon themselves, because that is the general feeling we have in my culture. The rest, the physicians, are busy dealing with their problems. And so again, if you come in with a substance use disorders, they think you brought that upon yourself. They have little time or resource to invest in you. And because of this, then, we have got limited knowledge of evidence-based practice. And so my question then is, how do we translate all this evidence that we have into practice? And I thought that one of the things that we need to do is to translate this knowledge into some sort of a program that can be accessed by more people and who can then be able to be practitioners and work with clients. And this then was the inspiration behind this program. And so we came up with this idea that what I need to do and what we needed to do as a university that is recognized in Kenya was to reflect on how we can translate this knowledge into a program that we could use and reach more Kenyans. Why universities are key in translating evidence into practice? I think one of the reasons is because the core business of a university is to do education, is to do training, it is to do research and generate knowledge, it is to disseminate knowledge. And therefore, I thought that what we need to do is convince universities to take up this knowledge and translate it into a program that they can then disseminate. And so for me, why universities are important is that we can take advantage of the structure that's already in place and just work them into accepting to take this as part of their business. Why specifically my university, which is Kenyatta University? A couple of reasons. One is that we have a philosophy, a mission, and a vision that talk about sensitivity and responsiveness to society needs, which talks about its mission being teaching, research, innovation, and community outreach. And what that meant for me is that we could then anchor the idea of drug demand reduction education into the philosophy, into the vision, and into the mission of my university. But of course, that meant that I had a bigger job of convincing my university to see that as their problem. And so the DDR education program was well anchored in the mission, philosophy, and vision. And it was a challenge to my university to respond to a need that was a big headache in society. And it was such a big headache that the former president of my country had to make a clarion call to our citizens to be a working nation, not a drinking nation. Because you go to certain areas in our country and there is nobody working, everybody was drinking. I come from a country where we are not very good at respecting laws. So even as I listened this morning to the debate about cannabis, I kept thinking, because there's a lot of agitation in my country to adopt similar practices, I worry because in my country, we barely respect laws. And that would mean that we could set up laws and decriminalize or legalize, and then we would expose a whole mass of people into lots of problems. So these are some of the issues that we struggle with as a country. And therefore then, I sought to see how my university could help translate the treatment evidence that was existing into a program that we could make available to Kenyans. We have a strategic advantage of being the second largest public university. We have got a network of campuses across the country. We have a diverse student culture, and we have lots of schools and departments which we could take advantage of. At the same time, we have lots of programs that range from certificate all the way to postgraduate programs. We have diverse modes of study from face-to-face to digital and virtual learning to blended. We have full-time courses and part-time courses. We have got vibrant faculty. We have got some reasonable, resources that we could take advantage of. And we have clear policies on curriculum development as well as policies on partnerships and collaborations. And so looking at what we had, then we started thinking that we could exploit that to translate evidence into an education program. And these are some of the steps that we used. First, we began to ask ourselves, where is that evidence and how shall we access it? I had the benefit of having been trained in the UTC curriculum, and I knew that their mode of disseminating curriculum was not sustainable for the simple reason that if you have to travel people from different parts of the world to another part of the world to build their capacity, then the costs may never be sustainable. And so I did feel strongly that anchoring these programs in existing university programs was the direction to go. And so for me, or for us as a university, what we needed to do was to think about how we can take the UTC curriculum and develop it into a program in our university. And so to do that, we actually had a discussion with Colombo Plan and were able to, sign up memoranda of understanding and agreement to be able to take this course and adapt it to our university. The second thing we had to think about is who really is our target audience and what do they need, or who needs that evidence anyway. And we looked at the relevant stakeholders who are working in the field, and like I said earlier, they are psychiatrists, they are physicians, they are sociologists, they are nurses, among others. We also thought about those who potentially will work in that field. They are not necessarily in the field, but they will probably work in the field. And so we thought about a course that could be both an in-service, but also a pre-service course. The next thing we had to think about is how diverse they are, and we also had to appreciate that they work in extremely diverse contexts. Some are inpatient, some are outpatient, some are work settings, workplace settings, some are educational settings, and we also had to reflect on the cultural diversities. The third thing we needed to do was to assess what kind of needs they had in terms of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and competencies that they needed to use in the areas they were working within an evidence-based perspective. And we identified the current gaps and challenges so that we could think about them in taking up this curriculum. As we were doing that, we had to consider several things. We had to think about availability, we had to think about relevance, because if you bring in something that people do not perceive to be relevant, then they're unlikely to take it in. So we thought about that. We thought about things like feasibility. We thought about adaptability. We thought about accessibility, and also how we could make it flexible to be able to reach our target audience. What was our goal? Our goal then became to design a university program that address the needs of practitioners in the field, as well as those who would be upcoming. And this curriculum had to be anchored on evidence-based knowledge. We had to make critical decisions to meet our goal. We had to ask ourselves, what kind of program do we need to have? What level shall it be? Is it undergraduate? Is it postgraduate? Is it a certificate? Is it a diploma? We had to ask ourselves, what's the entry behavior? Who are we going to take in as what's the criteria for admission? We had to think about what modes of delivery we are going to have, what kind of credit waivers shall we give, what content shall be taught, what methods shall we use to evaluate, what quality assurance methods are we going to put in place. So we had to think through these questions as we thought about how to get to our goal. We then had to think about resources that we need. We had to find out or think through the human infrastructure. We had to think about the IT resources. We had to think about the library resources. We had to think about the processes of curriculum approval and all that. The next question we were thinking about is, how do we mobilize that resource? I did say earlier, we come from a country which is classified as a low-resource country. And therefore, we have lots of competing interests. And so trying to sell a curriculum on drug demand reduction is not a priority for our university, I can assure you. And therefore, we had to think about how do we mobilize resources. We had to think about who can our partners be, whether it is internal or external. We had to think about how we can anchor our idea in our institutional priorities. We had to think about who in the key management we needed to lobby with so that our goal could become their goal. And so, of course, we had to think about tapping into what was already existing, what we called low-lying fruits. We had to think about what's already in place. For example, what schools or departments are already in place, which departments could fit this program into their mission and vision. We had to think about who had the goodwill for this program. We had to think about what were the contemporary directions in terms of policy. We had to think about whether we had any partnerships that we could take advantage of. So those are some of the things we thought about. What we had in our university at the time, which we saw as some of our strengths, included the following. Our university was encouraging us to develop new courses, and therefore we took advantage of that. In fact, the university, the national policy has changed the admission process for undergraduate programs, and therefore universities now are being encouraged to develop more of postgraduate courses. And therefore for us, that was an opportunity we could ride on. We have very clear curriculum approval mechanisms, which we could actually use. We had an established School of Humanities and Social Sciences and a Department of Psychology, so we could anchor that curriculum there. The other thing we had to think about was advocacy. We had to think of who we need to push our agenda, the people who make things happen within the institution. And so we thought about our core stakeholders, the policy makers, the decision makers, the resource allocators, and how to bring them on board. We also had to think about whether we needed additional resources and infrastructure and what we needed to do. So we mapped out our internal and external stakeholders, and we started to engage them. We tapped into existing partnerships and collaborations. We began to think about talking with Colombo Plan into coming up with a collaboration, and we did that, and we signed an MOU and an MOA to be able to actually support the implementation of this program. Then we decided on the program, which was the postgraduate diploma in addiction treatment science, which was basically going to adapt the UTC curriculum and make it relevant to our context. We mapped out the program learning outcomes, which really was about asking ourselves, what are the unique needs of our context that we can infuse into the curriculum that was already developed, and what kind of outcomes do we want our graduates to be able to possess, to be able to perform in our local context. Then we came up with what we call the curriculum matrix, where we looked at courses that would meet each program learning outcome, and we also looked at the course learning outcomes for each course, and eventually we were able to come up with course descriptions, and we were able to design learning resources, evaluation mechanisms, key references, among other things. And then, of course, we had to reflect about how we shall engage in monitoring and evaluation of the curriculum implementation. We had to think about how we shall have examinations, internal and external, summative and formative as part of that. We also came up with modes of delivery. So our curriculum is both face-to-face. We hope it will be online in future dates. And of course, for now, we are using what is called a blended mode. We have both evening and regular or day classes. We came up with an admission criteria, and as we were doing this, we were careful to consider the diversity of the fields where the practitioners were coming from in terms of their disciplines. We thought about credit transfer and waivers. We subjected the curriculum to approval processes within the university and externally. And then, of course, we were able to think about implementation in terms of who is going to do what, by when, using what resources, and by what timelines. And we had to map out the resources. One of the things we had to do was, again, partner with Colombo Plan with support from INL to do capacity building of our staff to be able to deliver that curriculum. And then we generated mechanisms to review the curriculum from time to time in order to continue making it relevant and in order to infuse new knowledge, because knowledge keeps changing even as we go along. And then, of course, we had to think about dissemination of the program, which has been a challenge, but which we continue to do. So where are we right now? We have developed the program. In fact, it's been about 4 years, but the first class of 4 enthusiastic postgraduate students just started this May, just before I came here. So that's been one of our achievements. Some of our challenges included bottlenecks that delayed the signing of the MOUs and MOAs. We had an industrial strike of lecturers in our country, which delayed the process. Of course, we have constrained resources and funding. Nevertheless, we've learned a couple of lessons. The importance of knowledge and understanding of existing systems, where we are found, how we can exploit the strengths and opportunities, how we can take advantage of partnerships and collaborations, and how we can persistently engage top management and those who hold the key to decisions and to resources. In terms of way forward, we do hope that we can continue to engage the university management for more resource allocation. We do hope to tap into partnerships to strengthen the program, and hopefully we can continue monitoring the market feedback to be able to continually revise this curriculum and hopefully develop a higher level program and possibly a curriculum which is targeting prevention, because this one was based on treatment. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my experience. Thank you.
So I think we have maybe 15 minutes for questions.
So I was inspired by all the presentations, but regarding the Kenya presentation, I was wondering, Beatrice, what is the situation with HIV and substance users in your country? And, you know, in some countries, it's those trainings and as well as programs, treatment programs for people for HIV and drug use are isolated or separated. And I'm wondering if there is a problem with HIV and need to implement HIV prevention and treatment in drug using population, if you were able to integrate it into curriculum, and how?
Do these mics work?
Thank you for your question, very valid question. In fact, one of our treatment, the only government treatment center in Kenya for substance use disorders was actually started after the realization about the link between HIV and substance use. It was initially funded with funds from the HIV program because My country declared HIV/AIDS a disaster, and therefore there was a lot of resource allocation. And so yes, indeed, this is true. We have not considered factoring it into the curriculum, and I think that is very good food for thought for us, and thank you for that.
Good afternoon, and thank you for a very nice presentation. My question is about the Philippines. They did a very great job, like reducing 29 days curriculum to 10 days, but UTC, the basic curriculums are 8 modules, and there are the advanced curriculums coming on, like now they have 22 modules or something like that. Would you reduce the advanced curriculum as well, or it's already included in the process that you did? You got my question?
I think we didn't hear, so we didn't quite hear. Maybe say it again.
Okay. This is working? Yes. It's not working well, maybe.
No, now it's working.
Okay. My question is about the Philippines, that they work on the basic UTC curriculum, and there is advanced curriculum as well. You will work also on advanced curriculum or not? It will also like shrink or reduce? You'll reduce the size or not? That's the question.
After reviewing the cluster 2, which sounds to be an advanced cluster, I thought we should be developing a third cluster which should focus on skills that can be provided to our university service workers. Now, the reason why we had a first cluster with the topics that I have shown you is because we expect that many who will attend our cluster 1 will probably not attend cluster 2. So these are probably university professors of philosophy, biology, I don't know. So we still have to watch how it's going to be received in the university. But that is the plan for now, divided into clusters. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Great panel, all women's panel on these issues, demand reduction. My question goes a bit like, having heard from Beatrice how much of collaboration you have with the stakeholders, and it looked like as it's really widely implemented, over to Marie Isabel, because in the Philippines, when you talk about you have to implement like the current drug policy issues and the current way that drug use is treated in your country, I wonder how much collaboration with your local offices is actually possible, and in how far you have a special status at the university that can actually make the case for demand reduction beyond the very harmful way of supply reduction that still includes killings in your country.
Okay, it's a sensitive issue, but okay, I'll try to answer it. We have learned to work with the Department of Health and the local government units. You see, the politics, the drug politics in our country is this. There are pronouncements from the office of the president and the police, I mean the military. And then you have pronouncements from a drug prevention agency, which is also of the government. Then we have Department of Health, which is quiet and diplomatic. But we get our programs working in communities. Surprisingly, the mayors, the governors, they're all for it. I think it was our timing that did it. We did it 1 year before election time. So I got the feeling that all this picture taking after a workshop works well for our governors and mayors who were running the year after next. So they love it. They love our program. It was something that they said was an accomplishment of each, of each province or each city. The president, our president, you know the personality of our president. he will do what he wants to do. And maybe he has heard about Ateneo going to communities, but that's for him. Let them do what they want to do. But I'll do my own take in terms of how the problem could be killed. Yeah. So, crossing our fingers that we can meet somewhere. I don't know when.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your work.
This is it's an extreme example, but every country, every community has a context that they have to work within, the particular politics, the particular prejudices, the stigma of, whatever. And I think it's, for me, the creativity of all of these folks in terms of how they work within the context that they have and still stick to what we understand as the science is really the real story here of how we managed to do that.
Hello, my name is Marina Vetrova. I'm Nidainternational Fellow from Russia. And this speech, thank you all for this speech, and it's very inspired me to do something like this in Russia. Even we don't have this specific context of evidence-based treatment like methadone, buprenorphine. So my question, I actually have two questions to Beatrice. So first of all, you say that you develop this curriculum, this program, based on which specific evidence-based options? I mean, what you actually use? Can you talk more specifically about, do you use SBIRT or assist model? What exactly you use? And my second question, you said that you developed this program for 4 years. And do you have any assumptions? How do you think how long it takes to actually implement this program to the real life, to the university? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your two questions. Yes, you asked about which evidence, where is the evidence? Yes, the evidence we got from the UTC, or Universal Treatment Curriculum, which has been developed by Colombo Plan Drug Advisory Program with support from the US State Department. It has brought together experts from different parts of the world to write that curriculum and produce manuals, which they use to train to disseminate that curriculum. So that is where we got the basic curriculum from, which we then had to enter into partnerships or memoranda of understanding and agreement to be able to pick and adapt it to fit our local context. So it has got all the different courses that my colleague talked about, the physiology and pharmacology, assessment, treatment for co-occurring disorders, crisis intervention, ethics, etc. The other question was how long it took. Sincerely, how long it takes does depend on the factors on the ground and the context. One of the things that made our curriculum process take long was, I did say that for 2 years, we had a lot of, industrial action by faculty in universities in Kenya about agitation for enumeration. And so that, I would say a year and a half was lost because of that. The second challenge we encountered was actually, the CEO of my organization did not necessarily agree with the Colombo CEO over the terms of the memoranda of understanding. So we hit a snag at one point, and I had to work really hard to ensure that none of them threw it through the window, and we held it in limbo, and we gave them time, and I revisited it once again. And we had a new CEO who saw things differently and was quick to say it's okay. So I think this would depend on who's heading your institution, what are the politics in your country and your institution, but I think above all, how determined you are to pursue the course. I think that for me is the biggest lesson I learned, that if you persist because you see the goal, then you're probably going to surmount all these challenges, which will be unique depending on country and institution and culture. Thank you.
Any more questions?
There's one.
Oh, okay.
My question is about Kenya. I was wondering if you have any way of trying to bring traditional healers into your program?
traditional healers. Traditional healers? Okay, thank you. One of the things that we're working on in our country in the field of physical health is to introduce complementary medicine, and there's a lot of effort towards that. So we do hope that along the way, we're going to bring in the different types of practitioners to come and begin to engage on how we can think about evidence-based practice. We've had conversations around where is this evidence generated? And does that evidence necessarily apply to our context? But then I say, are we subjecting our own practice into test? And so we will, and we are considering bringing everyone on board. One of the things that we are just doing, Dr. Kim said that I have also been involved in founding an organization called ISAP, International Society for Substance Use Professionals, treatment and prevention professionals. And just before I came here, we are getting into an MOU with the local churches in Kenya to train them on evidence-based way of thinking about substance use. And for us, that's a big breakthrough because religion is a key factor in Kenya on matters health. And so I do think that along the way, we're going to bring on board the different stakeholders, including those that ascribe to what we call traditional methods of treatment. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Can you join me in thanking our panel again?
electricity plugs.
If you don't,
No, I don't touch this.
how about here? These are the plug. Right here.
Yeah, you might be right.
Oh,
Maybe I'll
where's the
try one
monitor?
of these. This will be the mic.
I think they're down there. They're not on.
Oh.
Yeah, the PowerPoints will be there.
I definitely have mine memorized.
We have like green back over there.
Spring from the distance. Start happening.
And how do you advance the slides? They're
Good question. I don't know.
the thing that says that.
This is a
Green and red.
clicker. Yeah, I think.
Oh, that moves it forward.
Yep,
and
let's
then
move
moves back.
forward and backward,
Oh,
and then
okay.
which one is the? You probably don't have the pointer.
No pointer.
They have the
Nobody
pointer,
has
yeah.
used pointers.
Yeah.
You need a pointer?
Is it okay? So all of the European plug has to be converted. Yeah, but that
It seemed like that would be the notes together, right?
Oh, no. I can't pronounce names, so I just let you know. That's what you're doing, just understand.
can you
I can do that, okay.
Or just the name Zhang is better or this version is better?
Zangley.
Zhang Li?
That's the Vietnamese way of writing name. Usually, when it comes to the US, it's just they have to switch around. It's a living example.
Do you think we can ask someone to take our picture?
Yes, that would be good actually. And there was somebody sitting here in front. Or maybe we can in any case when we're done there take after that.
Yeah. You're responsible for it.
Yeah, I mean Steve Gust was here before and when he started on.
He says
Well,
they're
we're
just gonna.
just come up.
I know it's very. Yeah. Yeah, it looks seamless.
They got a time limit.
They do.
Yeah, don't worry. I think they
Yes.
back. Oh no, we still have.
Slap you? She said, I'm good.
You suddenly get distracted to something completely different.
Yeah.
Like,
Maybe it's a little bit of eye movement desensitization.
okay, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll slowly be back for the last panel. If we could already have the first slide of my presentation up as a... Great, just to see how that works. Yep. Great. Thank you, everybody who's still here. We know it's been a long day, a lot of presentations, a lot of interesting people to meet throughout the conference also. So my name is Anja Busse. I work for United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and mainly on our global treatment project. We would like to thank really also in the name of all the speakers, first of all, really NIDA International for having us here. It's an honor and a pleasure to meet you all here. And the session we would like to talk about and discuss with you about this 1.5 hours still to come is about training materials on elements of family therapy for the treatment of adolescents with substance use disorders. So that's something we have recently developed at UNODC together with the input of many experts, and of whom 3 of them we have here with us on podium. And so you have seen on the agenda, let's see if that works out. Right, so who's here with us on panel is, first of all, Professor Philip Cunningham. He's professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science Family Services Research Center in South Carolina, and Philip has a long-standing commitment to addressing psychosocial needs of children and adolescents, especially those who are disadvantaged and underserved. And Philip also collaborated with the former center director, Scott Hengler, in conducting many of the pioneering outcome studies of multisystemic therapy, a comprehensive family and evidence-based treatment. And then also here with us on panel, we have Lemin Zhang, or Zhang Le. He's associate professor and the chair of the Department of Global Health and deputy director of the Center for Training and Research on Substance Use HIV at Hanoi Medical University in Vietnam. And he also led the development of the Vietnam HIV Addiction Technology Transfer Center together with colleagues from the US at Hanoi Medical University. And then we also have here Molly Bobek. She's the Director of Clinical Implementation at the Center on Addiction in New York. on faculty at the Ackerman Institute for the Family, a preeminent training facility for family therapy in the United States, and she's also a therapist in private practice. So, and how all of us kind of got together, you're going to hear about a little bit more now. So just to say welcome again. And I will be not only chairing, but also doing the first presentation. So I'm changing hats now, kind of to start sharing with you a little bit how we went about developing and initially implementing this family therapy training modules, and what we will be up to in the future. So, but maybe first of all, for all of those who don't know UNODC, as said, it stands for United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. What you can see there is our headquarters in Vienna as it was portrayed in the Black Panther movie, in case some of you have seen it. So that's the place where in the end, you know, it was decided to share the good energy. So, but nevertheless, I mean, our office is not as big as it seems there. Most of the offices are actually covered by another agency, but we have 1 or 2 floors there. But most of all, UNODC also has offices all around the world, field offices, the biggest ones in Afghanistan and Colombia, but also in many, many other countries in the world. And our mandate to work on drugs comes from the international drug control conventions, but obviously, as the name says, there is also a mandate to work on crime. So UNODC is also looking into all the other not so nice things in this world, like human trafficking, drug trafficking, anti-terrorism, anti-corruption, and so on. Just a couple of data to start with. So, I mean, one of our, let's say, flagship publications is the World Drug Report. This is still 2018. New one is about to come out. So, at global level, there are estimates that roughly 5.6% of the global population between 15 to 64 have used the drug at least once during the past year, so to say. And some 31 million people are considered to suffer from drug use disorders and therefore to be in actual need of drug treatment. And also the 2018 World Drug Report for the first time looked a bit more what's the situation for younger people, so people under 18. Basically, first of all, there's very limited data available. Cannabis also in this group remains the most commonly used drug globally, at least among young people, and also polydrug use remains common among young people. What you can see on the slide is a little bit comparison with general population estimates, and you see that there's quite some variation across countries when it comes to comparing general population and young people cannabis use. Also, the World Drug Report kind of looked into adolescents and drug-related arrests. And again, I need to say data are very limited. So based on an estimates from over 40 countries, it seems that about 3% of people arrested or cautioned for the possession of drugs in the year 2015 were aged 18 or younger. And for more serious offenses like drug sales, let's say, 1% of those arrested or prosecuted were children, so also under 18, but this still translates to roughly 170,000 people, and this is not global, because as I said, this is an estimate based on 40 countries. And as we are kind of moving into the topic of treatment of adolescent substance use disorders, just to remind us again that obviously there is a huge range of biopsychosocial risk and protective factors, and you yesterday had a session on social determinants kind of health or of substance use disorders, and all of this comes into play, and then obviously, let's say, accelerated by the special time adolescence and the brain developments going on there. And sorry. Yes, and I mean, one thing I also just wanted to mention, and this is something we have taken into account when starting this work, is some studies, pointing in the direction that while, so to say, adolescents coming from poorer communities might be experimenting less with drugs than adolescents coming from richer communities or groups, but they are on the other side much more on the trajectory for actually developing dependence in later life. So there is some sort of an important factor that contributes to inequalities, also when it comes to, let's say, socioeconomic status and drug use disorders. I mean, in this, you are very familiar with kind of the risk of a range of risk factors for substance use, but the, let's say, interesting thing is that the same risk factors very often also play a role in the development of other behaviors, such as, for example, early school dropout, teenage pregnancy, violence, delinquency, and so on. And family factors kind of are an important factor to consider across all these areas. And that's something, as I said initially in UNODC, we are working, not only on the drugs mandate, but also on the crime mandate. So for us and for the member states in UNODC or supporting UNODC, it's very important to look at kind of what is available that can have outcomes beyond one area, maybe that can have an impact, let's say, on drug use and delinquency at the same time. Well, and being said, I mean, looking at all these vulnerabilities, they're not a destiny, they can be influenced. And I'd just like to point you to the existence of both the international standards for drug use prevention, that here actually is an old photo, it's a UNODC WHO publication, and also the international standards for the treatment of drug use disorders, which is again a UNODC WHO joint publication, and which in a much more comprehensive way than what we can do today kind of line out a range of evidence-based interventions across a larger spectrum. Also, I wanted to say that supporting adolescents with substance use disorders is very much in line with the existing international policy framework. And, I've just listed a couple of conventions or resolutions that are important, like, maybe the most important convention of the rights of the child, but also the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which is the steering board, let's say, for UNODC, or the parliament in the end that makes global drug policy, passed Resolution 58.2 on supporting available scientific evidence-based treatment and care for children and young people. So there is a clear mandate, let's say, coming from international community to do such work. And also, just to remind you that both drug prevention and treatment are part of sustainable development agenda. So it's not only, so to say, something that international community considers as good for, let's say, or in support of people with drug use disorders, but actually it's being considered that this plays an important role in the overall development of countries and regions, and I think that's very important. And also important to hold accountable national and international decision makers. So finally, coming to the talk really in more detail of this presentation. So, I mean, a little bit like you've seen before, especially in low and middle income countries, adolescents with drug use disorders and their families are facing grave challenges, especially without access to effective treatment and rehabilitation services. And there are estimates that at global level, and this is not only for adolescents, but for general population, only 1 in 6 people in need of drug treatment would have access to it. And, for some regions, this is a very optimistic estimate, but because it's a global average. And so we started looking at what's there kind of in terms of offering support to families and adolescents with substance use disorders, and very quickly came across family therapies, form of psychotherapy that really works to reduce family distress, maybe enhance family solidarity and improve, let's say, the functioning and communication within family members. Family therapy, and we'll talk about that in more detail, has a strong evidence for treating adolescent substance use disorders and conduct problems. And it was both recommended in the UNODC International Treatment, UNODC WHO International Treatment Standards, but also by WHO in another publication on mental health, the WHO MHGAP. And nevertheless, I mean, there are huge barriers to the implementation of family therapy in the community, and I think that's something we wanted to look at. Also, as we were thinking going to low and middle income countries, and just in the presentation before, I mean, you've heard of some of those real life challenges very much. So, and then what we started doing actually not so long ago, in collaboration with WHO and leading experts in the field of family therapy with funding from the government of Japan, we started developing a science-informed, skills-based and scalable treatment training package with elements of family therapy. So you see that, on one side we are trying to be a little bit modest, it's really elements of family therapy. which has to do very much with the fact that we wanted to have something that has a potential to be scalable. Whoops, and well, these are just a couple of slides that are not coming from us, that I've just borrowed from others that have done studies, but just so to say, to make the point, this is from one particular family therapy model, BSFT, that could show how it is working very well in engaging and retaining difficult use and family members into treatment, which is a huge challenge. And obviously that it works on what we started talking about, the reduction in drug use. This is from multidimensional family therapy, better than individual psychotherapy. And these slides I've borrowed from a recent presentation by Ken Winters that kind of looked at that family treatment as well as cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing would be, let's say, recommended or important approaches in terms of adolescent substance use treatment, sometimes also kind of combined in combination. So either family therapy, let's say, with elements of motivational or cognitive behavioral therapy, or with contingency management, so in different forms. But that's where the science is. Question, and this is from the WHO Evidence Center, how the recommendation is made there for family therapy, especially around cannabis and stimulant use, after they have done actually a systematic literature review. So the overall objective when we sat down and developed the first draft for the UNFT to make elements of evidence-based family therapy available as part of our UNODC training materials that are already existing on other areas, to have this training material then, of course, in the public domain, because everything that has a UN logo on is in the public domain, and think about implementation in low and middle income countries. And, one of the things, of course, we were trying to think of something that ideally doesn't do any harm, right? So that it's not only well-meant, and then in the end, kind of things get messy. And the UNFT is now very much part of the TreatNet training materials, which some of you might have heard of, and I show later. These are training materials that we started developing together with a team at UCLA around, I think, 2005, 6 or something, and that are covering both screening, brief interventions, pharmacological treatment, psychosocial treatment. Now there is a module on management of treatment services. And so these family therapy materials will enter this training package. So they are not supposed to be standalone, but be part of a bigger family of training materials. And just to say, because we had the UTC kind of presentations, so the treatment training package is very much complementary to the UTC, and in many ways even UTC has looked into the treatment training materials when developing. There's a huge exchange, and UNODC is also involved in the peer review of the UTC. So these are not, let's say, exclusive, but complementary training approaches. Another thing which we did when we developed the UNFT, and this is a little bit more tricky, as I said, our mandate is much broader than drug treatment, so we also kind of were asked kind of to look into, is this potentially going to work also in other areas? And we started exploring the potential to prevent recruitment into violent extremist organizations and gangs at the same time. And all of this, obviously, with a big goal to create societies resilient to drugs and crime. And just to say, and this is again from certain selected studies really, how this is again from a European study on multidimensional family therapy. It showed, so to say, better reductions in delinquency compared with group therapy, I think this was. Yeah. And we also looked into a study that very initially kind of showed promise in reducing high gang risk and rearrests and so on among gang members. So all of this for us was very important, that there is this promise also across other areas of our mandate, so that it ideally should work for substance use treatment. But if it's also going to be beneficial for other areas, then that would be very helpful. So this is, for example, a risk list that has been developed on violent extremism prevention, and among one of the risks these researchers identified was also that stressors such as family crisis were among the identified risk factors. And our colleagues that are working on violent extremism prevention very much highlighted how the role of family is key in terms of prevention of radicalization, the recruitment into violent extremist groups, and then for those that actually left as foreign fighters, the travel of vulnerable youth. So let's say there was some indication, but I'm not talking evidence, right? Yeah, this maybe I'll skip. So, and then just to come to the overall UNODC process, how we started, and then I will be handing over to Philip. So in, I think, more or less a year ago, so where this has all been a very fast process, in May last year, we brought together in Vienna a diverse group of people, and Philip is going to talk more about that. So leading researchers in the field of family therapy, but also researchers, experts, and practitioners from low-middle income countries, mainly in Asia. And with this group, we started the development of the family therapy models, and Philip is now going to talk about that. I just wanted to highlight you kind of what came after, and this we will then, well, or maybe I'll hand over to you here, and then what happened after, I'll tell you when I come back.
Thank you. Push the green button, right?
Yeah, green button is on.
Well, thank you very much, Anya, and thank you, NIDA International, for inviting me. Seems like I'm going many places dealing with evidence-based treatment, so I do thank you. And my picture is not, I'm not in that photo because I was a day late. My wife and I, to celebrate our 60th birthdays, went on our first cruise, so, but I'm disappointed. Okay, all right. I'm gonna talk to you about the sessions that I was involved with. My slides is not moving.
They're not yet here.
Oh. Oh, you know. Great, okay, great. Sorry about that. So I'm Philippe Cunningham. I'm at the Medical University of South Carolina down in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm in the Division of Global and Community Health. I've been there since 1993, where I started internship with working under the tutelage of a guy named Scott Hingler, who developed multisystemic therapy. And so I've been involved with multisystemic therapy research and this further evaluation and development and dissemination over the last 20 years. I should tell you, though, I'm also part of what's called the MST Services Network, which is a for-profit organization that is involved in the dissemination of multi-systemic therapy intellectual properties. MST Services has an agreement with the Medical University to disseminate MST intellectual properties. I own a company with a colleague in providing those services to interested folks. Part of that work had been the integration of contingency management into multisystemic therapy, and that really became the basis of our business, dealing specifically with juvenile delinquents who also had a substance abuse disorder. So it was great to be invited to Vienna. I'd never been to Vienna. I thought it was wonderful, wonderful experience, great people. So we had several sessions that I was involved with. The first session dealt with experts from Asia with experience in low and middle income companies working in the area of substance abuse, and particularly those involved in the criminal justice system. And so they shared their experiences with their countries and kind of where their country was at that point in time in terms of what it was doing, the country was doing with substance abuse generally. The presenters there were from, again, from low and middle income countries. Regina, and I'm not going to pronounce last names because I went to a Puerto Rico university, and I'll be honest with you, I'm just bad with names. That's why I couldn't be a politician. Okay, so Regina was presented on the Philippines, and her presentation, development of community-based drug prevention and recovery interventions in the Philippines. Mongerie, who was connected with Fred Piercy, who was actually a professor at Virginia Tech where I got my doctorate. But she presented on substance abuse practices in India, then Li Ming, family-based interventions, particularly in the area of opioid injection users in Vietnam. Azizbek focused on engagement of families in the provision of evidence-based treatments for drug-using youth in Central Asia. Jazem focused on work she was involved with. We're working with probation officers and juvenile delinquents in Turkey. And then finally, Laura Charles presented on just practical observations of family therapy disruptors and creating efficient and impactful knowledge transfer exchanges in low and middle income countries. So from this presentation, from these presenters, I personally got a firsthand look at what was involved, what we're being tasked to do as researchers and experts in evidence-based family-based therapies for adolescents, particularly those involved in the criminal justice system. And to be honest with you, I'm going to share with Anya, the reason I agreed to go was I had my business hat on. I'm like, the UN. We could be worldwide. So I was being greedy. Okay, that was my attempt at humor. Okay, it's late in the day, I get it, okay. But I came as a businessman asking the question, are there some opportunities here for me to share resources around intellectual properties around multi-systemic therapy? So that's why I went, and I cut short my vacation with my wife to travel to Vienna. But I was so touched by what presenters, this first panel, shared with us, because it's the same thing that got me involved in dealing with kids of color. My mission going into graduate school, working with Scott Hingler, was to work with someone doing great research, helping those who are disenfranchised and don't have access to resources. And for me, it was inner city kids, particularly African American kids. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and Southeast. And so, Anacostia has just had all sorts of problems with substance use. And so I had a lot of friends who really had suffered over the years. So when I heard these presentations, I was just taken aback with, wow, we have to do something. That there's some great opportunities to do good work to spread science-based interventions around the world. Then this led to the panel that I was involved with. So these are leading researchers in the area of evidence-based treatment, family-based treatments, dealing with serious and chronic problems with adolescents and juvenile delinquents, substance abusing delinquents, kids generally with externalizing disorders. So all the panels were essentially all the top flight investigators in the area of evidence-based, family-based treatments for adolescents. And so I was kind of like what is it called, like a groupie. I felt like I was like, wow, these are all people I've really researched when I was in graduate school and also my young career in family-based work. And the presenters there was first Natasha. She focused on family therapy with disengaged youth. Her work had centered around kids, basically some involved in sex work, but kids who had run away from home. Tom Sexton presented on functional family therapy. And by the way, these are all evidence-based treatments for adolescent behavioral problems and delinquency, substance use. So if you do a research on evidence-based practices with kids with externalized disorders, you're going to come in contact with one of these models. Howard Little presented on multidimensional family therapy. Henriker focused on MDFT as it was implemented in Europe. Jose Chapasnik presented on brief strategic family therapy. Monique Statz presented on adolescent community reinforcement approach to adolescent substance use. Maria Zaza presented on the matrix model, which is a model that incorporates several evidence-based elements, including CBT, MI, contingency management, 12-step facilitation, some family therapy, and then medication-assisted treatment. And then finally, Farrah Piercy presented on just goals and skills common in evidence-based treatment. He had done a review, a published paper that focused on that. So our group, we were tasked with first presenting each of our models independently, and to be honest with you, there was some, what's the word, when alpha males get together, I'm gonna do better than you. That was my second attempt at humor, okay, all right. And so, but I was, like I said, I was a group. I'm like, I'm with Howard Little, Jose Chapasnik, so I was real impressed. So basically we were tasked with, well, like, what are the common elements and evidence-based treatments for adolescent substance use, and particularly those kids who are involved in the criminal justice system? So first, it had to be science-informed. It had a focus on human rights. It has to be human rights-based. It has to be skill-based. You have to teach people skills. That it had to be practical and as simple as possible. So let me pause for a second. So if you were trying to implement MST, which is the only evidence-based model I can speak on personally, what's required, if you wanted to contract with me for me to share with you, help you and your faculty, your team, your whoever, be exposed to MST, what it's going to require is going to be 40 hours upfront work. And that upfront work is just to see if you are ready as a facility organization to actually, so we do what is it called? Stuck for a word. Yeah, a needs assessment, but also we assess, are you ready to implement an evidence-based treatment? And that work, that usually takes, like I say, probably 40 hours, because we not only meet with the provider, but we also meet with the provider stakeholders. Once we sign the contract, now we're looking at 40 hours of somebody teaching your staff how to implement MST, right, on site. Then it requires weekly case consultation, but it also requires quarterly booster trainings. Every 6 months, we do a report that basically assesses how well or not you're doing MST. Now, of course, that comes with a lot of dollar signs. That's a lot of money. And ain't no way somebody in Vietnam is going to pay that kind of money to, regardless of how problematic it is. So when Anya impressed upon me, and our first panel impressed upon me, this idea that we are focused on low and middle income countries with few resources, I still want you to tell me what we can extract from the literature, from your evidence-based models, what we can use in these countries. And so when we say being practical and simple, we're thinking that you're not going to have that sort of time and those sorts of resources to put into developing a group of individuals that can implement an evidence-based treatment. It also had to be scalable, that we're only looking at 3 to 4 total days of training. We had to focus on the common elements of effective family interventions. It had to be feasible and adaptable, because we're dealing with multiple countries, not just one single country. And then finally, it had to be flexible, because it had to meet the cultural context. And I think the previous panel talked about what's happening on the ground. The reality of what's happening in your community, what's happening in your country in and around substance abuse treatment. So it had to be flexible. So with that backdrop, now there were definitely some heated discussions around what these core elements were. And so part of my task intellectually was I had to literally separate myself from the scientist that I am and think about, well, what is unique? What's unique about family therapy, evidence-based family treatments for kids? And can we pull something out that could be used in a low and middle income country, a country with low resources? And so that really took some interactions with our panel. I can honestly say that Jose Chapasnik and myself kind of went head to head several times over a couple of days as we were trying to work out what these core elements were. Howard, by the way, was actually really more accommodating, even though he has this New York, Philadelphia, inner city style about him. So here's where we landed. So in general, when we think about family therapy, our group landed on what we know about family, what we know about kids. Kids are embedded in multiple systems of influence, particularly a family influence that can directly or indirectly influence their behavior. So to begin thinking about doing family therapy in any country, what you have to train people to do is have a systemic mindset. You got to see behavior in context. So you just can't look at substance use per se. That may be the presenting problem, but families are really complicated. That substance abusing kid, substance use itself may just be symptomatic of a larger family issue around folks just aren't interacting with that. There's a lot of negative affect. There's all sorts of, like in families we work with, it's not only high conflict, but there's low affect connection, right? And so that's just part of the complicated picture, that you have to make sure that that if you're training someone, they get that kids are embedded in multiple systems of influence, family being particularly important. Family-based treatments primarily include the source, but it's also the opportunity. It might be the source of problems, but it also is the source of success. And if you can train families, give parents the skills, families the skills and tools to be effective, they can do a wonderful job at raising their kids. It also we had to look at multiple units of analysis. You're looking at the individual kid probably, but you're also looking at family interactions in and around that problem. What are the coalitions like? How do things move from A to B, so to speak, and how to interrupt those sorts of interaction? This idea of principle of circular causality is that we maintain a non-blaming relational understanding. One part of the task is training someone to understand that families are doing the best they can with the resources that they have. You can't live their life for them. You can't take over their parenting. Right? You can't give them resources. You can just give them tools, skills to be ultimately effective in impacting their kids' lives. Family-based interventions goes beyond just treatment of the individual kid and family, because you also are treating when you're dealing with substance abuse and delinquents, you also have to be prepared to have families deal with their peer group. The number one predictor of a kid using drugs is who you hang with, right? The number one predictor. Most drug use occur in a deviant peer context. The number one predictor of relapse is who you hang with. If you go into treatment, come out of treatment, and you go back hanging out with your same substance abusing friends you hung out with prior to going into treatment, you come out, you hang out with them, you're going to probably relapse. The number one predictor of relapse. Lost this. All right. Therapy process is not symptom specific. It's focused on the whole family system and addresses underlying relationship issues and interaction patterns. It goes beyond problem with substance use. I'm going to pull out a few more. Ability to assess sustainable resources through the family. What this really translates into, I have to teach someone of how to teach a parent how to look at their resources that they have available to them in the social context that they live in that can directly and indirectly influence their kids' behavior. So when I think about, for example, straightforward empirically based intervention called contingency management, where we use reinforcers to reinforce abstinence and negative aversive consequences to punish drug use, right? That's a simple concept developed by B.F. Skinner, pretty straightforward. But how those reinforcers look are quite different given the resources that are available to a kid or a family, right? A kid in America, parent may give them allowance. A kid in Vietnam, parents probably don't have access to those sorts of resources to give a kid an allowance. So we have to think about, again, the context in which people live. Both conceptualization and interventions bring back fundamentals like love, connection, bonding, trust among family members. And so you'd be surprised at the number of families where there's little or no affective connection, right? Sometimes this treatment is literally about how to teach someone to show affection, right? I mean, literally, I spent some time with, Nida was involved with the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy's media campaign on helping America's youth. One of their public services announcements had to do with basically having actors model a parent how to actors modeling for parents how to have a relationship, how to start conversations with their kid. You'd be surprised at the number of parents really don't know how to have a conversation with a 12, 13, 14-year-old. Finally, well, there are one or two more. Fidelity is critically important. That if you're going to do an evidence-based treatment or core elements of evidence-based treatment, you got to focus on fidelity. One of the things I learned a long time ago is that it's easy to quit on people with significant problems. It's easy for mental health practitioners, substance abuse counselors to quit on the kids and families they work with. I mean, one of the reasons that MI had taken off so well was because historically substance abusers were dropping out of treatment. and the way substance abusers were treated back then made a lot of sense. And so this idea of we got to make sure we give the clinician the skills and competencies, and fidelity measurement actually can see whether or not they're actually using those skills or not. And then finally, that we're looking at an ongoing relationship, that we really have to be in a position to support families, and so family engagement is critically important. And by the way, you'd be surprised to know the number of folks in mental health and substance abuse treatment haven't been taught how to have a relationship. And so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Philip, for a little bit this insight of our first expert group meeting in Vienna. And as said, I'll kind of come back and walk you through the process of what basically happened after. And so after this meeting, kind of the group helped us to have an outline of training materials, right? And with this outline of training materials, we then brought on board two consultants, Natasha Slesnik, who was supposed to speak today, but she had an emergency, so unfortunately she cannot join us today, and Fred Piercy. And they really took the lead in drafting the training materials, which then also went into extensive peer review, including to all this group, but even broader. And then we started with 3 pilot trainings in Asia, and one in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and in South Asia. Then the materials were finalized based on this pilot experience and the peer review. And in March 2019, we launched the materials. And in parallel to all of this, we started doing a literature review, though not really a systematic literature review, more an explorative, I would say, on the protective role that families maybe could have when it comes to prevention of recruitment into violent extremist groups. So, I mean, in terms of the development of the UNFT, we are especially thankful, again, to Fred Piercy and Natasha, that really, with the speed of light, put these materials together. And so in some of the things that are now in these training materials are, for example, each slide has really extensive trainer instructions. There are pre-post tests in. There's training satisfaction assessment in. There are a lot of case presentations in. There's lots of role play. Actually, I think already slide 7 or so is the first role play. And it's really about skills and not knowledge transfer, which I would say the rest of our TreatNet training materials maybe are heavier on the side of knowledge, and this one is heavier on the side of skills. And there's also lecture, and we have, thanks to the Center on Addiction in New York, that were very kind with us, now also a couple of videos integrated. So this is the outline of the UNFT, how we used it actually as a training of trainers. So it was 5 days for a training of trainers. Very short, so it's really elements of family therapy. On day 1, it was a little bit about the theoretical foundations of family therapy. Also, we kind of have a small session on information on adolescent drug use disorders, some core assumptions of family therapy like systems thinking, what Philip was just talking about, and also there was a discussion around cultural issues in each of the regional trainings. Day 2 focuses very much on core strategies, and it means a lot of skill practicing, like positive reframing, positive relational reframes, perspective taking, how to go with resistance. And then day 3, and that was something really the participants requested a lot, has more the treatment phases, like what do you do first, what do you do after, so how from engagement and the family kind of assessment takes place, how to create the motivational context, some interventions, how to bring it in, but also how to end. And then day 4, what says here, additional issues and problem solving, are some of the questions that came up throughout the training, for example. So for example, home visits are very common, let's say, in many of the evidence-based models, but were not so common in the regions where we did the pilot trainings, maybe. So people were asking, how do you do that, under what circumstances, what kind of safety measures? Or there were questions, if there is violence in the therapy session, how do you deal with that? Or how do you prevent that in the first place? Or other things, if a family comes in and presents comments like, we don't have a problem, so all of these things kind of were addressed more on day 4, and day 4 then also there was time to prepare for the micro teachings, which then took place at day 5. So day 5 is really the day, that had this training of trainers focus and the evaluation, but so we think that if we start training it to practitioners, we will now initially go for 4 days, right? Because they don't need to do the teach back so much, or we leave it for more time for actual skills practicing. These are kind of the 82 people from 16 countries involved in the pilot trainings. Some of your countries, I think, also. For example, we had people from the Philippines there. And then there was a quite extensive feedback session on the last day. Mainly we received qualitative feedback, and so we did focus groups and we did questionnaires, and we received a lot of suggestions from these pilot participants. For example, there was this request to really have videos. So because people kind of felt a little bit insecure, what do you do, and can I look at that again? And so we managed, based on this feedback, for example, to include videos. And then only in March 2019 now, this year, so let's say way less than a year from our expert meeting, right? So you see the turnover was actually very fast, and this is, to tell you the truth, because our funding was about to expire, so we had to be really fast. So, so we launched the package at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, presented it to interested member states, and it went up on the website where you can at least go have a quick look at it if you want to. As I said, it's going to be very much integrated with our TreatNet training materials, so surely not a standalone. So people, that will be trained on this will have a chance to also receive the training on motivational interviewing or CBT or the volumes on pharmacological treatment. So that's all there, and it can be put together, let's say, modular. The way we have done it in the pilot training, so was a 5-day training on family therapy. These are just to give you a taste of it, some slides from the actual UNFT. Here it talks about engagement, how you build a working alliance with the family, how you join, the validation, the stimulation of hope, and it goes then very quickly actually into role plays. And we also kind of started putting all of this more in a trainer's manual, which is not published yet, but which basically kind of has all the instructions then more visible, available for all the future trainers. So that's the process so far. So we have the draft training package, we have the trainer's manual in principle, we have the training package already translated into French, Spanish, Russian, and Bahasa, which is Indonesian, and I'll tell you why. And we have the draft literature reviews to explore the potential on violent extremism. Not published, likely not published. We need to see how we go about that. And then in 2019, so we are taking this like here to a range of scientific conferences, really also to hear back from you, right? And to tell us, maybe add this, or how about that, and can this work in my country, and get some, constructive criticism also from groups like you. And yes, and then as a way forward, so as we are talking, we have started the development of a study protocol for a feasibility study. Cecilia Essau from Roehampton University in London is going to be our PI for that. And also Fred Piercy kind of is working with us again to now actually draft a therapist manual in line with the training materials. And then in 2019-20, and again we have to be ready by March 2020, we are planning to do a feasibility study targeting a marginalized community setting in Indonesia. And as we are talking, we're still exploring where this could be. And also if there are any researchers from Indonesia, we're still looking for our national research partner. So, come and talk to us. And so in March 2020, we will need to present the initial results from this feasibility study. So this is kind of information from the government of Indonesia that basically told us that family referral takes about 40% of treatment-seeking behavior. So 40% of people come referred by families. And depending on the region, there's between 23, that would be the national average, to 50% of clients in outpatient treatment programs 18 years old or younger. So there is a big population of that age group treatment seeking. And in reality, without us supporting this much, the Indonesian counterparts have immediately taken the training materials and already done an echo training. So and we were not much involved in that, but they said this is useful for us, we roll it out. And they trained in another 34 provincial clinics and in 6 residential treatment programs. So in reality, this is interesting for us because, they gave us the first data that they had, they did pre and post tests, and so they had a knowledge increase of 28%, and this totally detached from us, just saying, okay, let's do it, so which was nevertheless kind of interesting. And and then also there are some considerations that we need to take into account for our feasibility study, and some limitations maybe to that. We will need to go in an area, that is somewhat, where the services are somewhat in reach of families in need, and where there are at least some services still existing, right? So other than that, who do we train? And we will need to take into account that wherever we go, we also will need, of course, the political buy-in from the local governments for the feasibility study. And then, and this is going to be very much future work, but maybe in a year from now, hopefully we are already there. Obviously, we're hoping that after the feasibility study, we can take this to more of a study on actual outcomes in the families and with the adolescents. And we will keeping on exploring carefully, though, these linkages with other UNODC mandate areas, such as prevention of violent extremism, but maybe also looking into areas of prevention of human trafficking. And so on. So with this, I thank you for your attention and put on my hat as a chair of the panel again. And just to say that we will take questions at the end. So we will have Zhang now presenting, and then Molly, and then you get, let's say, the roundabout picture, and then we're up for questions and comments. So the floor is yours, Zhang.
Good afternoon. I'd like again to thank UNODC and Anya for asking me to be part of this panel, and also I want to thank Nida for supporting this panel. So my role in this panel is to, now we have a UNFT, and how does that fit into the picture for Vietnam, especially in addressing the HIV and substance abuse epidemic in the country. I'm with the Hanoi Medical University, but as the Anya mentioned, I also lead the Vietnam HIV Addiction Technology Transfer Center, which is supported by PEPFAR and SAMHSA at Hanoi Medical University. So I will go quickly, give you a big context of Vietnam, and then go to how I see the UNFT would fit into our work and also our plan ahead. So this is the big picture. As you know, that the HIV epidemic in Vietnam in the past 20 years have been driven by people who inject drugs. But the good news is that we are seeing a real decline in prevalence in the past 10 years, especially with the introduction of ARV and MMT. And even in some urban settings, the HIV incident now is getting to 0. And this is a really good news, and a big study supported by NIDA, led by Don Desjardins, has shown that in Hai Phong, one of the urban settings, the HIV incidence among injection drug users is really declining. And that's really thanks to one of the largest expansion of methadone program in the world. And between 2008 to 2017, in 10 years, we increased the clinic almost from 0 to more than 300 clinics in the country, reaching more than 50,000 patients. And currently we have all of the provinces in Vietnam, 63 provinces already have methadone clinics. And this is really addressed both the opioid epidemic and the HIV epidemic in the country. But that's actually raised a few challenges. The first one is as the injection drug user live longer and they don't die because of HIV, thanks God, and but they're staying in treatment also at both addiction and HIV treatment longer. That's create a huge burden for the family. Most countries in Asia and other settings, you see that family really involved with the people who inject drug. In our survey supported an R03 study supported by NIDA, 521 opioid injection drug users in Hanoi, we saw that comparing between the HIV positive versus HIV negative people who inject drug, the family actually provided more support for people who are HIV positive, and this is something that's quite uncommon in other settings. Similarly, family also talk more about HIV and with their children once they get infected. Who are actually in the family, that would be parents, the spouses, and children, and those who are living with the people who inject drug, and they are the one who provide the main support for these individuals. But that led to this is the same study we survey among the family members. As you can see that the predictors of common mental health disorders here include depression, anxiety, and stress. Care burden is the largest, is the main predictors. And then we see also the row below, FF, which is family functioning, has inversely related to stress for the family members. And care burden increase both depression, anxiety, and stress. And meanwhile, the HIV status actually contribute much less as compared to the care burden and family functioning. And also the family function actually a predictor of mass use among opioid injectors. This is a lo and behold as we expand our methadone program. Actually now methamphetamine, is becoming the drug of choice in Vietnam, especially in urban settings. And so many of the opioid injection drug users who are stable on methadone are now turning to methamphetamine as their drug of choice. So here we have a poster on Sunday, tomorrow at noon, where we look at the family functioning as a direct predictor of mass use, and family functioning is affected by mental health of the people who use drug. So given that context, the changing rapidly of the drug scene in Vietnam, moving from heroin to methamphetamine, the increasing number of people who are living with HIV staying on treatment, and that creates a huge burden for the family in terms of caring, in terms of and other issues as well. So what are some of the challenges? Of course, many injection drug users conceal the drug use and HIV status from family members. But also the issue of stigma, and the stigma here is not just aimed at the people who inject drug, but also aimed at the family, because in Vietnam, that's considered as a collective identity. And because of the stigma, both the family and the people who inject drug tend to isolate themselves from the support of the community. The third challenge is our addiction workforce and system is fledgling at best. As you can see that we just started the methadone program 10 years ago, and we still have a lot of challenges in building the addiction workforce. For example, we don't have any counselor who are trained in family therapy. Most of our providers don't appreciate the healthcare needs of the family, as well as they don't see the therapeutic potential of the family. What they see is that if they have a problem with the patient, they would call up the family as if the family should be responsible for that problems. Meanwhile, the family think that now I have put my son, my daughters into your hand, that's your problem, not my problem anymore. So there's that kind of tension between the providers and the family in terms of how to solve the emerging issues such as methamphetamine use. So why UNFP is beyond appropriate for Vietnam and beyond? As I mentioned, that we have very limited human resources, and yet there's a huge need for family intervention and family therapy, and that's actually, as I shown earlier, not only having good effects on family functioning, on family members, but also directly have good impacts on the outcome of substance use. UNFD is supported by other TreatNet models, which, as you know, that have been used worldwide and really friendly to users who don't have, usually in a context like Vietnam, they don't have a graduate training in clinical psychology or social work or other similar fields. UNFP is adaptable to existing experiences in working with the people who use drugs and their family members. And lastly, as you can see that despite the materials already built up, there's still a lot of work that need to be done by local trainers to adapt the principle, the materials to social and cultural context, and hence there would need to be constant monitoring of the process. So what would we do in Vietnam? We as a VHATTC are supported by PEPFAR and SAMHSA, and we would like to, and our role in Vietnam is to train and provide technical assistance for providers, not only in the methadone clinics, but also in the treatment system in Vietnam in general, healthcare system, as they address the drug use. So what we would plan to do is that we would use UNFT as a component in a comprehensive package to address, first of all, methamphetamine use among HIV positive methadone patients, so that we could really help them to stay in treatment and help to maintain the good effect of methadone treatment on HIV epidemic. But also we need to address the mass use among adolescents. As I mentioned, that mass now, methamphetamine, ATS in general, is now becoming the drug of choice in Vietnam, and really have to do something about that. And lastly, we will evaluation of this pilot work, and hopefully together with the experience from Indonesia, we will develop the training materials and also looking whether we could submit for future NIH grants. So that's the plan for Vietnam, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think that was very useful to really, give us food for thought how we can take this further. I'd like to give the floor now to Molly Bobek, who, as I said, you were saying today you are a bit the new kid on the block. So you joined us kind of in the later stages of developing these materials. But when you did, I think it made a huge difference, not only because you gave us the videos, but also really you helped us, work on this message of common elements. So floor is yours. We'll be happy to hear from you.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Anya. Thanks to UNFT, and thank you for thank you to the NIDA Forum. It's really a tremendous honor to be here. And as Anya mentioned, myself and my colleague Erin Hoag at Center on Addiction came aboard this collaboration sort of late in the game. But I think it was certainly some wisdom in that, because what I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about today is sort of our course of research there that supports a common elements approach. And I'll talk a little bit about some NIDA-funded work that has meant to sort of illustrate three main questions, or to answer three main questions. The first being, can treatment in the real world for family therapy for adolescent substance use, which we know is the most effective practice, can treatment in the real world work outside of manualized proprietary family therapy. So that's the first question that we've been trying to ask and answer over the past 10 years. The second question, if so, then what is that? What is real-world, non-manualized family therapy? And then the third question, which is sort of the next steps of our work, is if so, then how do we train folks in non-proprietary, non-manualized, effective family therapy for adolescent substance use? So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So we've already touched upon this a little bit, but one of the things we know is that there's some really significant barriers for the dissemination and implementation of these evidence-based practices. As Philippe was talking about, they're a little bit clinically complex, and that interventions are sequenced in a particular way. We also know that the kind of quality assurance that's required by the manualized family therapies for adolescent substance use are expensive, they can be demanding, hard to sustain. And then we also know that if this piece is missing, if there isn't ongoing fidelity, maintenance, and quality assurance, that doesn't lead to the same outcomes that happens in the manualized treatment, in the study of the manualized treatments. And so we embarked on, again, a search to sort of try to think about another way than these manualized family therapies. And in that, we sort of think about this core elements approach as a way of kind of being disruptive innovators. Maybe we're flattering ourselves a little bit with that, but it keeps us excited, so that's what we're going with. One of the things that we want to be really clear about is that the core elements approach is not meant to replace the evidence-based family models. We're not trying to put Philippe out of business. What we are trying to do is have a place for the kinds of institutions that maybe at this moment can't totally afford Philippe and what he might have to offer, as he was saying. So, and one of the ways that we've found to be helpful to talk a little bit about that is this idea of some of these metaphors. So just like for our banking, you can do a lot of work with an ATM, but sometimes you still need the bank teller to do certain things. We know that, for example, for those of us that need glasses, sometimes we can pick up reading glasses at the drugstore that will work just as well, but sometimes you need the optician. And so we know that there are certain settings, certain high-need settings, certain settings that have a lot of resources for which the manualized treatments still have a place. But we also believe that the core elements approach has a place in those settings that cannot afford the challenges in sustainability that the manualized treatments present. And so we believe, again, that this core elements approach has these benefits of being scalable, sustainable, and yet still effective. And so one of the questions we have is, so how do we know if a core elements approach works? And so one of the ways we thought to think about that is to see what was happening in the real world in family therapy outside of the manualized laboratory-based studies. So starting about 12 years ago, we did a study in New York City where we recruited 204 youth that were not treatment seeking, and we randomized them to community mental health, two settings, one in which it was family therapy that was not manualized. Family therapy was just the standard of care in that clinic. And then the other half to a few other clinics that was sort of treatment as usual, primarily individual or group-based psychotherapy for substance use problems. And what we found was really exciting. So the first thing we found is that so in these real-world settings, that treatment as usual and family therapy in this routine setting were both effective. But we also saw that the family therapy condition outperformed on 5 of the 12 outcomes. What we also saw that was really exciting to us is that in the family therapy condition, they did just as well as laboratory-based studies of practitioners using manuals. And then, in fact, on some measures, surpassed adherence to those folks that are using a manualized model. So this was information to us that real-world family therapy can work, that family therapy outside of a manualized treatment can work, and so it sort of gave us our marching orders to try to figure out how to disseminate that more broadly. So it sort of brought us to our second question is, how do we determine what the core elements of family therapy are? So Philippe described that UNFT engaged in this, a real theoretical distillation, those 17 principles that you talked through. We thought that could be interesting and perhaps fun to think about empirically what might the core elements be. And so we took up a task of taking videotapes from three different prominent manualized family therapies for adolescent substance use: multidimensional family therapy, brief strategic family therapy, and functional family therapy. And those purveyors of those models sort of gave us their roadmaps. They gave us what they use to assess fidelity in the sessions of therapists that are being trained in that model. They gave us the ways in which their models assess adherence. And so we got these 300 videotapes, and we watched all of the videotapes with the fidelity scales from all three models. So we took the MDFT videotapes, and we spent a lot of time. It was a lot of fun, thousands of videos, thousands of hours of watching, and used the adherence scale for MDFT for those MDFT tapes. We used the scale for MDFT rather for both the MDFT tapes, the BSFT tapes, and the FFT tapes, and I did that with all three scales, with the belief that through a factor analysis that we could yield some of these distilled common elements in an empirical way. And it was really exciting because we were able to. So after taking those ratings, those observational fidelity scales, and having applied them to the gold standard tapes, we came up with these four key elements: interactional change, sort of behavioral change, second order change, relational reframe, adolescent engagement principles, and then this idea of relational emphasis. We did an exploratory factor analysis and then a confirmatory factor analysis that yielded these four main factors. And that was really exciting to us that these factors held up. But the models we used emerged from laboratory studies where there was kind of these tapes that were considered gold standard. We were interested in seeing if we could take some tapes from real world settings and see if those factors held up. So we pulled together 300 more frontline videotapes. We used 100 tapes from that study I just talked about a moment ago, and then we also pulled from an MST study that was a frontline sample, and an FFT, a functional family therapy study that was a frontline sample. And then we used the scale that emerged, so from that first round of factor analysis, what we were calling our core elements of family therapy scale, about 26 items, and applied that to these frontline tapes, yielding what we then can think are these are the confirmed common factors because they emerged from gold standard tapes. They were held up in a frontline sample. And the good news is that they did. We lost a few items, but these 21 items, these core elements of family therapy, emerged in ways that are very supportive of both our own theoretical distillation and also what Philippe was talking about. So we're really excited because this work of watching these tapes and thinking about how factor analysis can support what we're learning supports these theoretical distillations. And so that means that there's a lot of evidence to support the approach that UNFT is using and to support the model being applied in these pilot programs and beyond. And so the last thing I'll just talk about is sort of our next steps in the work we're doing here at Center on Addiction, because we have this third question, right? So if we have these core elements, what is the best way to train people? We know that training science shows that there's a lot of complexities around training. Sometimes we talk about the train and pray model, right? Where folks go to a training and then they go out into the world, and how do we know what they're doing is what we taught them. And so we are engaged in a current project to see, is there perhaps a new way to train providers in this core elements of family therapy, this evidence-based approach that perhaps is supportive of effective utilization of these family therapy techniques. So based on those core elements, those 21 core items, we've developed 45 brief 5 to 8 minute video vignettes featuring therapists. They're real therapists demonstrating family therapy techniques in sessions. The family members are actors, but the content is based on real cases. And we created sort of a learning management system that's online. It's akin to a Blackboard. We use a program called Talent, if folks are familiar with that. And we have two goals through that learning management system: to increase the use of family therapy techniques and also family participation in treatment. You know, one of your slides earlier made this great point that family therapy and family-based interventions are different, right? You can have family members in a room but not necessarily be doing family therapy in terms of, are you understanding both the problems and solutions as systemic and relational? And I think this current study is trying to increase both. And so through this training system, clinicians, we've recruited across New York State about 150 therapists working in community-based mental health and substance use treatment services. So on a weekly basis, these clinicians will watch this 5 to 8 minute video of the vignette, delivering a sample of the family therapy techniques. And then they'll go to a quiz with those 21 items that we've distilled to be the common elements of family therapy. And they're going to score the extent to which those clinicians use the techniques in the video they saw. They're not rating effectiveness, they're not rating alliance, they're rating the extensiveness of these techniques. And then they'll get immediate feedback about if they rated those techniques correctly or not, according to our sort of expert coding that we did in-house. On this parallel process, they're also rating their own sessions using the same checklist. And monthly, they're getting feedback reports summarizing the techniques that they use. And they're also audio recording their own sessions, so we'll have the opportunity to see if their self-reports match what we would observationally say. You know, what's appealing to us about this current project is that it's meant to be sort of as automated as possible. We know that, again, there's this huge barrier of expense and sustainability. And so if this online training is effective, we don't know, we're in the midst of this NIDA-funded project now. This has the opportunity to provide a training system that is accessible, that's inexpensive, that can be widely used, that's low threshold for providers. We think it's going to take them about 20 minutes a week to use, and then has the opportunity to perhaps be utilized in other ways. We're fortunate to have some additional funding now from NIMH to build the same system for cognitive behavioral therapy. And then again, with those two, CBT plus family therapy, we're really getting at close to a full package of what the state of the science says is effective for adolescents that use substances. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly, for the presentation. I think according to agenda, we would have 15 minutes for questions or comments to all of the presenters. So if you'd have something, I'll invite you to join the microphones. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Basuni from Egypt. How you implement the program in other countries other than the Asian countries, like in Africa, for example?
You know, as you saw, our timelines were very tight, right? The first outline was only developed more or less 12 months ago, and with the funding we had, we mainly went to Asia. But with the translations that we are done, we are already thinking, so to say, of other regions. So far we have French available, not Arabic yet, but you know, that will be future music. But I think for a package that really 14 months ago was just the outline developed, we have it now in 4 languages. So chances are we will also take it to your region at some point. And also because it's going to be, as I said, part of the TreatNet training package. And for example, in Egypt, we have a lot of TreatNet trainers kind of and previous experience with TreatNet trainings, you know, so there might be a possibility to start building on something. Yeah?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. I'm Nander. My question goes to Anya. So we are very delighted to hear about the family therapy. So what's your suggestions? What are the initiatives? How to start this program in Myanmar?
Yes, I mean, first of all, I have to say that there is initially already, this level of interest in these very new training materials. So far, again, I mean, we haven't trained in Myanmar. Myanmar was, now I need to think, I think Myanmar was not part of the countries that were part of the pilot training in Southeast Asia. So in reality, for us to do it would be, we would need to sit and see if we find an opportunity which mainly is about the funding. On the other side, as you saw, I mean, this is a 4-day training. It's not going to be hugely expensive. Mainly, we will need to send in 2 or 3 trainers. And then the other question will, of course, be the rollout at national level, which, at least the case of Indonesia was very encouraging that, without further support from UNODC, they managed to continue training, or what Zhang has presented, to then maybe look for additional research funding. But, in principle, talk to me, we'll surely find a way.
Congratulations, Anya, for this important curriculum. I have 2 comments. One is the definition of families. For example, it will be different from culture to culture. In Afghanistan, family is very extended than in the US and other countries. Like, we have grandma, we have cousins, and all these people. And another thing, some children or adolescents who are using drugs, they may not have families. They may lose families, and they will be living in orphanage, and mostly the caregiver will be the people who will do, the treatment center will be working with them. My comment is, if this part is included in the curriculum, if the child don't have family, then how we work with the caregivers.
Yeah, so maybe this question on how to work with extended families, or let's say, I'm looking at you to see if maybe you can respond. I mean, this question on how to work with extended families, or to work, so to say, in a systemic way with individuals is a little bit what the question was about. Maybe, Philip, if you could comment on that.
Sure. Is this on?
Or join me.
Oh, okay, sure. I'm good at that. So I think when I train folks in MST, when we think about family, we think about family broadly. Broadly, not only in who's living in the house, but who's the family connected to, and how are they connected, right? And so once you understand, every time you join any family, you really are learning their culture. Like, how does this family operate? Like, sometimes, for example, that a mother and a father may be, obviously the biological parents, but you have the paternal grandfather who basically sets the stage for how the family operates, right? And so when I think about engagement then, about helping a particular kid, it wouldn't do me any, it wouldn't help that particular kid in that sort of family if I don't talk to this grandfather. Like, so I would have to engage that grandfather. So part of the task from at least my clinical training has been that you think about families broadly. And family also could be neighbors, because in a lot of communities, there are neighbors. In America, we call, there are these, oh wow, I can't think of the term for, in every poor community, there's one person who knows everything about everybody.
Like a gatekeeper.
A gatekeeper, right. And so that's one of the people you would want to get on your team, right? So you're trying to organize this team of individuals who's connected with this kid to affect change. But it begins, though, with an understanding of this family culture and context. And you mentioned the issue of kids not having families. Well, I think Sasha's work, and actually I was doing some work with the LGBTQ Community Center in Lower Manhattan. And one of the issues they brought up was that these LGBT kids are kicked out of their families, right? But then when they're kicked out of their families, they actually are connected with other families. Now, maybe not families that we would think about as family, but they are connected. And in cases like that, we worked around how to engage that particular configuration of individuals to help a particular kid's sobriety. And sometimes we work with unification with the family, but it really depended on the context. I hope I answered your question.
Molly, did you also want to comment on that or not necessarily?
On what?
No, Molly, I'm just asking if she also would want to.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think what you said was really meaningful. And I also, the only thing I'll add is that a huge principle, I think, of relational and systemic thinking is a principle of self-determination. And so when we're thinking broadly, particularly if the adolescent is the sort of quote-unquote identified patient, how can we invite them to introduce us to their family of choice?
Yeah, and maybe just to add, I mean, really the training materials do not specify so much now you're sitting here with one person or with 10 persons. I think they're really flexible enough in that sense to look into, the systemic thinking and how to, work with relations. And I mean, and I got trained in Germany on family therapy, and honestly, most of family therapy trainings in Germany are with one person, not with an entire family. And I mean, and then, you still have this opportunity, instead of asking the father, what do you think? You ask the client, so what do you think your father would think a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. So to just, yeah, so we maybe take a question from this side and then we continue there.
Thank you. Since this initiative is going to be applied in low and middle income countries, I was wondering if within the manual you are including some skills or some tools to help the family manage some factors within the community that affects the family, like lack of education, lack of job opportunities, that also affects the dynamics within the family. So I was wondering if there are these kind of tools within the manual.
Maybe I'll respond, and Zhang, if you maybe also would want to comment on it. So, I mean, on one side, on day 4, we have this item, additional issues. It goes a little bit into that, I would say, directly in the training materials. The other thing, though, and this is, I think, why at the beginning of my presentation, I put a little bit these thoughts on, inequality, social determinants, that prevention and treatment are part of development agendas. I mean, there's always something that treatment alone will surely not be able to solve, right? Which is a much bigger community or national, international effort in reality. And I mean, overall issues with regard to lack of access to services, poverty, and so on, I mean, play a huge role in this. And surely, with this training alone, we will not solve that. That's also clear. But maybe you also want to comment.
Yes, I think that the training alone, that there's a lot of sort of big picture social determinants that we can address, like just the UNFP or any other family therapy. But one thing that you mentioned is very important is the issue of stigma in the community against the family, against the drug user themselves. And I think that's something we would definitely address in the training and also in the manual for therapy.
Maybe we'll take a question from that side, Larissa.
Thank you, Anja. So Johan Hari, in his book, he said that the contrary of addiction is not sobriety, but a connection. And I feel like your program is really strongly building up on that, despite still having that outcome, probably for everyone, being the abstinence. And my question would be related to social desirability. Like, is that considered in the training? Like the possibility that, especially in very punitive regimes where the family also really force the people to get back to the abstinence, that the adolescents may want to please the families, or they're afraid of relapsing and being, of relapsing or still being dependent on the drug, and in how far this social desirability throughout the process could actually impact the overall outcome that could be harmful in the long term.
Yeah, maybe I'll say something, and then Philip, you also want to comment. So, or maybe you go ahead first, and then I'll go.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand the question. So you're saying that in family therapy there may be this energy around presenting in a way that you're really not solving the problem, but just because of the relationship they're having with the clinician, that they put on, I guess, the best face possible, but things haven't changed, and long term they're going to have difficulties. Is that?
Yeah, basically when you talk about self-chosen LGBT families, I believe they're strongly supportive in whatever you do, but mainly your, like, let's say the biological family that is probably in most countries taken as the family in these interventions may be close to the people and they want to help, but they also may be really clear in defining an outcome that the adolescent is not necessarily to meet, which puts pressure on the adolescent that could at worst lead to suicide.
Okay, I hope I answered. So remember, from a family therapy perspective, the therapist doesn't define what health is or what success is. The people in front of you do. Now, each of them, though, come in with their own frame around what that is. And a competent clinician literally can learn to speak to everybody simultaneously based on their unique aspirations. For example, I mean, I like functional family therapy idea of when you're dealing with the authoritarian father who's saying, you're going to do it my way, or you know, that his intent is noble, what he's trying to accomplish, right? So it takes some skill in then getting that authoritarian father to become more authoritative in his presentation with his son. And there can be simple things. For example, you know, one kind of therapy move, family therapy, is with that sort of father, I can look at him and say, Dad, I really think he gets how pissed off you are with him, but I don't think he knows you love him. Won't you talk to him about that? Right? So I'm going from like hard, rough emotions to something softer. And I'm speaking to both of them simultaneously, right? And so I think the art of therapy, family therapy, is being able to look in front of you and see what you see and don't give it a label, right? I mean, I'm not saying mom is bad or good, or dad is bad or good, or the kid is bad or good. They're each trying to individually, in this context, try to achieve something. My task is to understand it, because once I understand it, now I can bring them together in a way that can support each of their goals and aspirations for themselves as well as their family. I hope that answered your question.
And maybe also to add, I mean, that the training package in that sense is not prescriptive about what the goal is, like abstinence or reduced substance use. It's in reality more around improved family functioning, and then that, so to say, has to do the rest of the trick a little bit. So, yeah, maybe we'll take a question here and there, and I'm aware that more or less we are reaching 5 o'clock, but maybe at least the last 2 questions, if you agree, we will still take, no?
Yes, thank you. I come from Mexico, and in Aguascalientes, we're actually trying to integrate a family component to our intervention as well. But we work with an early detection program. So adolescents don't have this big consumption, and parents don't know about the problem most of the times. So when we inform the parent about the problem, adolescents don't want to participate in the intervention program anymore, and they drop out. So we have this huge problem, and I'm actually presenting a poster tomorrow about all the barriers that we have found. But I don't know if any of you know about how can we integrate parents in the intervention in these early stages of the program.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll give the floor either to Philip or Molly, because we were talking before, and I showed also on one slide that this is actually where family therapies are doing quite good in, right? In bringing the other family members in.
I'll start and then we can pick up the Sure. I guess, so I think it's related to what we were saying earlier, is that I think one way to engage both the teen and the parent in that particular context is think really carefully about how we define the problem. Because just based on the little that you shared so far, if the idea is we're going to engage your parent because you've screened positively for having a substance use issue, yeah, you're going to not get very far. But what if we were to, one of the ways that I think family therapy aims to endeavor to engage both youth and their parents is coming up with a problem definition that is non-pathological, non-pejorative, and something that maybe each part of the system has some investment in. And so how can maybe, in that case, think with the youth about how can we talk a little bit about what's happening in a way that maybe will not invite condemnation from your parents, but be an invitation to the two of you having a different kind of experience together. Just
that touched my soul. I'm good.
And I mean, and I guess it's this, Zhang, you were saying in your presentation, that's something that you also share a bit, so that a lot of family members do not know about substance use. And so do you just want to comment on that also a little bit, and how you are approaching it, or how you would be thinking about approaching that in Vietnam?
I think that, again, going back to one of the core elements is the self-determination. I think that you have to really respect the youth first and foremost, although we want to be protective. Sometimes the people in my country also, that the providers want to be very, jump right in and want to do something and call up the family and things like that. But I think they really to respect the young people, respect their youth, their self-determination, and their willing to, they also have a ways to disclose their problems. So I think that's very important to engage with them.
And maybe just to add a general thought that, of course, there's never this one size fits all, right? So I'm not sure what's the main substance that people are seeking treatment for, right? And family therapy and these engagement techniques can always help. But let's say if that's, for example, the substance where we have, let's say, a pharmacological treatment for or something like that, it's also always another thing to think about how to attract people to treatment. Or, there was this question before on social factors, right? So sometimes it's important to provide whatever, transportation, food, all these things to get people in, or, so.
I would just say one quick thing. When you think about family engagement or adolescent engagement or caregiver engagement, you can't think about one model fitting all. And the best thing I've learned to help engage anyone is to first listen to them and make sure you clearly can articulate what it is that this person is interested in, what they see as the problem. Most of the time, clinicians are trying to move people, right, from A to B. And in family therapy, you're really doing a dance with people. You're both leading sometimes, and sometimes you're being led. But I think the mistake that many clinicians make is to think about they have to get to a place, right? But the best thing you can do is listen to someone and make sure whatever comes out of your mouth is consistent with what they're talking about.
I mean, there also have been these recommendations that really everybody involved in treatment, even the person who picks up the phone, yes, right, more the secretary, already is trained to some extent. So, so that this first contact is already, very consciously dedicated to bringing family members in. So, another question, comment.
So, George O'Neill from Perth in Western Australia. I just was keen to ask the panel members a comment on family therapy and opiate pharmacotherapy. And I just preface the question by making a comment. We've looked after about 12,000 patients, and about 80% of them present with their family, and they're offered opiate maintenance and opiate antagonist treatment with an implant gets repeated about once a year. And so in that setting, if they present with their family, they nearly always ask for an abstinence-based opiate antagonist treatment, and if they present by themselves, there'll be much stronger tendency to ask for opiate maintenance. But I just wonder, with family therapy, whether you've got a lot of experience in which pharmacotherapy fits best, or if there's any relationship between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just need to clarify again the question. So you were saying some families are more requesting, so to say, opioid...
I'm just saying we've seen 12,000 people, and 80% of them would come with their families. And about 98% of those would leave with opiate antagonist therapy. And the other 20%, probably 50% would get treated with opiate maintenance, and the other 50% would get treated with 50% would be on opiate maintenance, and 50% would be with naltrexone implants. So I'm saying
we notice this tendency when people present with a family to aim at abstinence much more seriously. And I just wonder if anybody else in the room has got experience in noting the difference between people presenting as individuals compared with people presenting as families.
I have one thought, and I'm not sure if it's going to be a total fit, I guess, because I think it also speaks to maybe somewhat the training material offers, and also what we've been talking about is that I think that family therapy doesn't also always mean everybody in the room all the time. And so for those 80% of the cases, if in your experience, there appears to be this constraint, this belief that if the family wasn't here, something different would be happening. You know, I think from the family therapy point of view, that's an opportunity to do what we might call sort of like some subsystem work. You know, speaking with the person that may be advocating abstinence about what would it be like for you if your loved one chose a different path than what you might be advocating for. Speaking with somebody else about what would it be like to talk about your choice of treatment with them? How can I help you talk about that with them? So that's what occurred to me as you were talking. I don't know if that feels germane to what you were saying.
By the way, the opposite is also true, that you have caregivers come in really concerned about their kid who won't come into treatment.
Yeah.
And you also have to help them figure out ways to then interact with that kid such that you can get that person in. I mean, that's like craft. Yeah, I think it's craft.
Yeah.
Did that more or less answer your question?
Probably our experience is unusual because treatment alternatives are unusual, but we do notice this tendency for families to be pleased to aim in the abstinence direction, and so we've just noticed that tendency amongst the patients as they present, and that's just been our experience. And I think family therapy does work particularly well in that group.
Yeah, and maybe even after panel, I mean, maybe we can meet for a moment and just, you know, understand even better this experience you're presenting. Yes, so then maybe last, and also I will close after. So
actually, I was going to close.
I was thinking you're about to do so. Yes, so we're 10 minutes late.
No worries. I want to thank Anya and Kim and the presenters this afternoon and all of you participants, and we will see you Monday night across the hall at the poster session. Thank you very much.